Well, hello all. Today I want to talk about the science of fig jam or fig preserve making. Is there science in making fig jam or fig preserve? Now, not long ago I made a video on how I think the science syllabus, especially in South Africa but around the world, is not tailored towards useful daily, everyday activity science. So we can use an everyday activity like making fig jam or fig preserve into a science lesson. There is so much science that goes into everything we do in everyday life, and I want to show you how much science there is in making fig jam or fig preserve. So we have a local troop of baboons, and I noticed they were eating all the figs off my fig tree. So I thought, well, I'd better climb in first and get my share. They've already eaten half the figs. So I went and I picked all the big ones and put them into a bucket, leaving all the small ones. So that already is a sorting or dividing process. So I did it visually by eye, where I just took the big ones. There's no point in taking the small ones. They're going to make so little jam. So sorting or dividing things into big and small, that we just did by eye. Then I applied a bit of science, and I've made fig jam, fig preserve many times before, but I thought I'd try something a little bit different. And that is, I thought that I'm going to freeze the figs. Now, why freeze the figs? What's the science behind freezing this now collected bucket of figs? Well, when you freeze anything, you might have put a bottle that's really full of liquid into the fridge, and when it freezes, it expands, and sometimes it expands so much it pops the bottle. And that is what I wanted to do. I wanted the water inside the fig cells to expand and blow apart the fig cells so that they would be open to receiving the sugar, and that would break them up and make them softer. And in fact, I froze the figs overnight, and in the morning when I thawed them again, they were definitely softer. So I like to do that when I'm making any kind of jam, is to freeze the fruit and then thaw it, and then the cells have been broken open. And you very often find that fruits that have been frozen, they don't have that hardness anymore. They're now soft and soggy, which is ideal for fig jam or for any kind of jam. Now, fig is a very hard fruit. We pick it green. I've tasted it. It's got no particular nice taste. There's no sugar, not much sugar in it. I don't know why the baboons love it, but they do. So the main thing to add flavor is you're going to add sugar to the figs, but you've got to get those figs soft to make a fig preserve or a fig jam. Now, fig preserve is slightly harder than fig jam. So what's the science in now making the figs soft? You're going to have to boil them. But before you boil them, you cut the stalk off the fig and you cut them in half now that they've thawed. And so I thawed them by just pouring cold water into the bucket, and all the icy figs thawed. And then I cut off the stem of the fig and cut them in half, because in the past there's been occasional figs that have worms in them. Some years it's worse and some years it's better. I'm going to look at ChatGPT or something and see if I can find the cause of the worms in the figs. I have spent an hour or two before trying to research it with no joy. I could not find what is the organism that causes those worms inside the fig. And you can see them when you cut them open, because it's black and not the clean, clear fig that you normally find. But this year I found an amazing thing, how to sort the wormy figs from the non-wormy figs. And there were only 3 wormy figs in the whole hundreds of perfectly fine figs. And those were the 3 figs that when you thawed them in a bucket of water, they sank to the bottom. So wormy figs are more dense. Density separates for you. If you were making a jam factory, and you wanted to sort out all the wormy figs from the fine figs, the fine figs, they're hollow inside and they float on top of your water, and the wormy figs, they have like a black, deformed, they're dark looking, and the center is not just clear like a normal fig, and they sink to the bottom. So there's a density difference between the bad and the good figs. Amazing, wonderful how they sorted themselves for me. So I took all the floating figs, cut off the stalk, put them in boiling water, and I've been boiling them now for an hour and a half. Now, I didn't have all the room in my pot, so I put some in the microwave and microwaved them for about an hour and 15 minutes, slightly less than the boiling time. And if I'd been really, well equipped, I would have put them in a pressure cooker and cooked them for half the time. So there's science. In a pressure cooker, when you close a liquid and you start to boil it, the vapor pressure increases and so does the boiling point. So it goes from, say, 100 to 110 degrees centigrade, and then your figs will cook much faster. Probably in 3/4 of an hour. It would have the same effect under pressure as boiling your figs for an hour and a half without a pressure cooker. So when you go onto a very high mountain, your boiling point drops even further, so your food hardly cooks on Mount Everest. You've got to cook it so long and it barely cooks. So we're at sea level, but figs, of all the jams, you've got to cook it really long, because those figs are really tough and you want them soft in a jam and even soft in a preserve. You want them almost falling apart. So now we're at the point where I've boiled the figs for half an hour and a half, and they're ready now to have the sugar added and turn them into the jam or preserve, the fun part. So let's show you what we can at this stage of the process. So that is what a wormy fig looks like. You can see it's like black inside, and I'm going to drop it into this bucket of water, and it's gone right to the bottom. It's sunk right to the bottom of the bucket. So here are the figs that I've now boiled on my induction cooker for an hour and a half, and here are the figs that I've microwaved for. You can see they're quite soft, and when you squeeze them, they barely come back to their original shape. I go to this one from the pot, I squeeze it, you can see that it just stays squashed. So these are now ready for preserve and for making into jam. I know in the past the way that I've made the jam is by putting the figs into let's just get a spoon here, by putting the figs into, this is the mortar, and squishing them with a pestle. So let's just demonstrate. You just squash them up a bit, and now you're going to get your jam. So that's just to break it up a little bit, and you can easily and quickly do this with and so this is now, you can see how easy it squishes into a mush, and that's going to be perfect for jam when you add the sugar. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add the sugar. Now you can see there's a certain amount of water in the bottom of the pot. Is there too much? I don't think so. When you boil it, you've got to have the figs covered with the water, otherwise they don't get boiled properly. What I could do is, perhaps you want as little water as possible, because you want to make as strong a syrup as possible. So I think I'm going to pour about half the water that's in here into the microwaved figs, and then boil this water and add sugar to it. So if you've got 2/3 of a pot of fig, I'm going to add about 1/3 of a pot of sugar. So about 1/3 of the amount of fruit, you add that amount of sugar. So let's get busy and do that. So we're going to pour out some of the water for now. We want a small amount of water. That looks about the right amount of water. And let's get this boiling, and we'll add sugar. So we need about 1/3. So that might look a lot of sugar, but believe me, you can barely ever have too much sugar. You really can't have too much sugar. You want your syrup to be as thick as possible. So now this must boil up. And we can let it boil till some of the water evaporates away and the syrup just becomes more and more concentrated. And now there's space in here. I think I could actually even add this to this. I think I'm going to add these to them because there is enough space without adding the liquid. So I think the figs have decreased slightly in size now. And we want all of the figs to soak in this sugary solution. So we want them to soak up the syrup. Doesn't matter if we squish them a bit, because some are going to end up as fig preserve, and most of it will probably, just depends what you want. Do you want fig preserve or do you want jam? You want fig jam, squish them up in your mortar and pestle. Afterwards, let it boil and absorb and then squish it up, and then you got jam. Or if you want fig preserve, just boil away a lot of the water here. But I need that amount of water to cover the figs. So I can't really have less water than that, otherwise they're not going to be able to come into contact with that sugary water. And now we're just going to boil that till some of the liquid boils away, and we're going to get as syrupy as possible. So here we are at the start of our half now, and that is what the pot of boiling figs looks like close up. You can see at this is early on into the reduction process. You can see how much steam is coming off depending on how fast you boil it, and that steam coming off is what's going to concentrate the syrup. So half an hour has passed and a lot of the water has boiled away, but you can see, so here is the syrup that is thickening, but you can see that the syrup is still quite watery. Look how it just falls off the spoon. And it's still up to about the halfway level, so we've got to boil, could it be 15-20 minutes more till all the water has boiled away. But the figs at the moment are absorbing sugar like crazy. I don't have to worry about it burning until it gets more concentrated than this. So you can see the liquid is still quite thin. It hasn't reduced sufficiently, and then I can keep moving the top figs to the bottom so that they all are sitting at some stage in the liquid and are able to absorb the syrup. And I don't care whether the figs break up or not, because I really want it mostly for jam, not for fig preserve. So they're looking perfect, they're looking soft, they're looking delicious, they're getting sweeter and sweeter. It's perfect, but it's going to have to boil for a bit longer. It has taken nearly 15 minutes, and I'm going to switch this off. there is a little bit of liquid at the bottom still. Don't know if you can see, and the liquid is still quite thin. I could keep on reducing this, but what I want to do is I want to let this cool, and then I'm going to, in this mortar and pestle, I'm going to smush it up a little bit, and then I think it's going to absorb the remainder of that liquid. These figs absorb an inordinate amount of sugar and a bit of water as well, but mostly sugar. And I think for the small amount of liquid that's left at the bottom, if we carry on any further, it could burn. So you'll see there is liquid at the bottom there, not much left. And as I say, when we smush this all up, it's going to absorb even more of what's left of that sugary water. It's not a thick syrup. I would say if you were going to make a preserve, not a jam like I'm making, you would throw in even more sugar and make it a really, really syrupy final liquid. But I think this is, I'm sure if I had to taste these, definitely sweet enough. And yeah, we're just going to smush it up and bottle it with the remainder of what's the liquid. Keep it in a deep freeze. With the amount of sugar that's in here, it's not going to freeze. It's just going to go slightly harder. And even that little bit of liquids that's left will be fairly firm. So there's going to be no harm in keeping this in a deep freeze, and it'll keep almost indefinitely. And we keep it away from the air, so we keep it in a bottle. We try and get as much into the bottle. And yeah, we'll show you what the bottle looks like once we've smushed it up a little bit. So let's analyze why I made a bottle and a half of this fig jam, and why was it so educational. So it's quite a dry mixture. All the water got absorbed as we crushed it. Here's some flatbread. Totally delicious. So why is it so educational making jam? Well, first of all, say we were doing this in school, we taught people a useful skill. They can take any fruit and they can go out and preserve it. So although I keep it in a deep freeze, the more sugar you add, the better it preserves it. And if we added no other preservatives, and this would last in a fridge for a month or two, in a deep freeze for 6 months. Outside of the fridge, I'm sure some mold will eventually grow on the top of it. So you have to eat it reasonably quickly. So that is teaching how foods are preserved. It's teaching a useful skill, how to make jam. It'd be wonderful if this sort of thing was in the school syllabus. We taught sorting, big and small. That might sound minor, but if you're going into an industry of making something on a grand scale, you might have to find a method of sieving, so you get only big figs and not the small ones. But anyway, we picked only the big ones. Then we found this marvelous method of softening the figs by first of all deep freezing them and then thawing them in a bucket of water. We found a way of sorting the good from the bad, and that is the bad figs that had worms sank to the bottom. The good figs who were more buoyant and floated on the top. So we could talk about density. There's a whole lesson there. I'm not trying to teach a lesson. I'm saying how you can build lessons around just a simple thing like making fig jam. Then we found that like the solubility of sugar in water. I have found, we did this in a glass experiment once, that you can put about 50 teaspoons of sugar in 1 cup of boiling water as long as you keep microwaving the cup and keep the water hot. In fact, you can get almost as much sugar, you can get almost an infinite amount of sugar into a cup of water. It just becomes like syrup. Now, this is not the most syrupy fig jam. I could have put another half as much sugar into the figs, and hey, just call it diabetes jam, and it would have just made it nice and lovely. I love sugar, and you can see the figs just absorb the sugar. So another lesson there is the boiling point rises as you add a solute like sugar or a solid substance like sugar to the solvent, which is water. And we could have had a whole lesson on the boiling point of water and how it rises as you add, say, salt or sugar to the water. And we could have also had a lesson on the boiling point at different altitudes. Here at sea level, it's a certain boils at 100 degrees. At Mount Everest, it probably boils at about 80 degrees centigrade or less. So there's all kinds of interesting science here. And I just think that you could have, we taught how you could crush it. People could think of ways that you could just pass it through a mincer, or we used a mortar and pestle. So they being exposed to a mortar and a pestle, we could have shown them how to make a mortar and a pestle on a lathe. There are so many useful things that are associated with making jam. If you had to try the same thing on a normal plate stove, you would have probably found it much easier to burn the bottom. On an induction cooker, there was no problem because the heat was spread evenly, and you teach them how to be careful as the water's boiling away. You don't want it to boil completely away, or you are going to burn and caramelize the sugar at the bottom of the pot. So there's a certain amount of diligence involved in watching the pot, checking the water, and turning the figs. I mean, wow. If you made it into a proper science lesson, you could have, you could teach so many aspects of science that are useful, and you're passing on a skill that is useful. So I feel all science should be practical and relate to everyday life. And you could have one of those digital thermometers, and you could check how your temperature's gone up when you add the sugar. Whereas it's boiling at 100 degrees, you add the sugar, it goes up to say about 110. You could have brought in the pressure cooking, how pressure increases the temperature. Put that same digital thermometer on the side of the pressure cooker and show how the temperature has risen inside the pressure cooker. All kinds of fascinating lessons, and at the same time make jam, and then the kids can go out and sell it. They could learn lessons about entrepreneurship and go and sell jam to their friends and family and strangers, and open a store. These are skills people need to be able to hustle and to sell stuff in the real world. Make stuff and sell stuff. Start with your friends and family. So I think this was a wonderful exercise in science, apart from giving us some lovely jam. As I say, I got 1.5 of these bottles, which is 1.5 bottles that the monkeys didn't get. Yay!